I'm so excited because Yvonne Barteau is our guest, and I was telling her before this how excited I am about tonight's conversation, and she was like, "Because of the topic?" And I am excited about the topic. We're talking about horse personality. So kind of like we had an episode about the Enneagram for humans, we're talking about horse personality traits and how you can use that in consideration of the horse you choose and the training plan you choose. Yvonne will tell us much more about that. But really, I'm excited to talk to Yvonne because she's an incredibly accomplished horse person and dressage trainer. And I think that we could talk about a million conversations that I would find really interesting, just given her depth of experience. So, we're going to dive into horse personality types because Yvonne has done so much like thoughtful research and work in the field on this topic. And I know you guys are really interested in this topic. So we'll talk about that. But I think you'll also just really enjoy our guests in general. So, Yvonne, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, I'm a crazy horse person, and I've been at it my whole life. I guess, should I tell you why I got interested in horse personalities and
Yes,
why
please.
that was something that was important to me? Because I grew up not around horses, and I love dogs, and I read all the dog books in the library that was close to us. And I ran out of dog books, and I picked up Walter Parley's Black Stallion, and I read it all in one night, and I was hooked. I was 12 years old, and I was like, wow, a horse on an island that only like this boy can ride and train. And I read it, and then there was more horse books, and I was horse book person after that. And I read everything, and I decided I was going to be a horse trainer from reading books, which was quite silly to all my
Wow.
family and everybody in my life because I wasn't a horse person. But when you learn stuff from books, and every horse, like they would talk about their personality, and I paid attention to that. And then when I got to meet real horses, which actually wasn't for a couple of years after I'd been avidly reading every single horse book like a maniac, when I met horses, I would say, "Oh, you're like Misty of Chincoteague, or you're like Ginger and Black Booty, or you're like this." And it wasn't really that. It's just I saw horses as like who they were and who they were described as. And then the first, I got some riding opportunities as a youngster, but the first real work I did with horses was when I went to the racetrack and I started studying young horses on the racetrack. And when I saw them, I realized they were young, so they're very true to themselves when they're young. And you started to notice even horses in the same training plan with the same program, same people looking at them, they still were themselves. And what is themselves? And so I would watch the young horses, the ones that were a little bit worried or fearful, the ones that were super confident and even challenging, and then the ones that were interested in everything, and then the ones that didn't pay much attention at all. And I just kind of started keeping track, and I guess I was categorizing them in my head. And it started then, but it went on for 7 years in the race horses, and then I trained problem horses and worked and broke and handled horses and fixed problems and started horses. And I learned a lot about them then. And then I started working at the Arabian Nights Dinner Theater, and we had 60 horses and 25 riders that worked every single night in a live theater event. And so I started to pay attention to what horses did what horses were comfortable with what, and then started to really realize that we needed to factor personalities into our training program and into what we thought the horse could do naturally, what would be his normal skill set, and then what would might be a bit of a challenge for a horse. So certain horses were going to be feature horses, certain horses were going to be drill horses. Why? Not just the way they look, but it was the way they could handle things. And so I was actually at the dinner theater, and we went to do a performance up at Equine Affair. We were the nighttime entertainment, so it meant they're shopping in the daytime, and I'm wandering around shopping and looking for books because I love horse books. I have a tremendous collection, and there was a couple books there at this booth, and I didn't have them, so I had them in my hand, and I was like, I want these books. And she said, "Oh, they're not really out yet, but you can pre-order them," which was super annoying to me because I had them in my hand, and I was like, "Well, I'm just going to sit here and browse through them and look at them for a little bit." And then the lady started talking to me, "Why are you here?" Whatever. And I said, "Well, we're here for the nighttime thing." And I started talking about horse personalities like I do. And she said, "Well, like what you're saying about horse personalities, how did you like learn that?" And I said, "Hanging around horses." And she said, no, but what you're saying about the differences in the types. And I said, hanging around horses. And I did spend some time with somebody that worked with Linda Tellington Jones for a long time. And I did read Linda Tellington Jones books, and I found those very interesting. And there is a lot of that that is very relevant. But I'm going to say 4 words to you, and I want you to think about what each of those words picture in your head. What is that? The word social, the word fearful, the word challenging, and the word aloof. Those are the 4 personality types of horses. And I would like to say that a horse's personality becomes apparent pretty much right when they're born. So if you pay attention and you're watching a baby horse and you keep watching them, you'll start to notice their personality. And I'll just give a quick analogy. Picture a bunch of mares and babies in a field. And you walk out to the field, you're a stranger to that group of horses. Take your jacket off, hang it on the fence. One of the babies is going to be like, what's that over there? And he's going to walk over and be interested in the jacket, maybe grab it, maybe pull it, play around with it a little bit. One of the babies saw somebody new coming in the field and ran and hide behind its mother, and it's peeking around the corner, not brave enough to come out, just watching to see if everything's okay, but not out there looking at that coat. Another horse is not paying attention at all. He saw it, dismissed it. He's eating grass or playing around. He doesn't really care about what's going on. And then the last of them will be a horse with all the swagger of a schoolyard bully. He's going to come over and he's going to argue with the horse that's playing with the coat and try and take it away from him and try to take charge of the situation. And that's the 4 personality types before they're weaned. And that's a pretty clear, quick description of them. But there are 3 factors that have to be mitigated when you're looking at horses. And it is the personality type of the horse, the energy level of the horse, and the intelligence of the horse. If you know those 3 things, you can make a plan to train that horse or handle that horse or fix a problem with that horse. The only thing is that horses are not introverted or extroverted like people, but they are either passive or aggressive about letting you know what their personality is. So I kind of made it like a scale from 1 to 10. A number 1 or 2 social horse is going to be mildly interested in what's going on, fairly comfortable, kind of a benevolent, nice guy. A 9 or 10 out of a 10 out of 10 social horses, you're a bucket banger. He's a yeller. He's the one that wants attention all the time, banging on the door. He's the one that's going to never leave the other horses alone in the paddock. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Got to have somebody with me. So the higher up a scale the horse is with its personality, the more that it's a factor to deal with in training and handling that horse. Consequently, a 1, 2, or 3 fearful horse is going to be a little cautious, maybe have a little kind of shallow comfort zone, whereas a 9 or 10 fearful horse is going to be panicky, claustrophobic, and then if you say a fearful horse that also has very high energy, that could be a really tricky horse for somebody to handle, or it just needs the absolute right person to handle it. And an aloof horse, they're often the one that is, you figure out their personality by default because, well, you're not this and you're not that. You maybe are this. They don't pay attention much at all. A lot of times you'll see an aloof horse that removes himself from stimulus. They might have their head in the back of the stall, not because anything's wrong with them. They're just blocking stimulus. They've had enough. They don't want to interact all the time. Interacting is tiring for them. And so, for me as a dressage trainer, when I have to talk to a horse about as quick as I'm talking to you, an aloof horse is sometimes harder for me to get my sentence structure through. This is this, and this is this, and this is this. And, they just, because they're not always paying attention. And
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like to think they're like watching the snow channel in their head. There's not, it's like, hey, turn back to my channel. Like, and some horses are always paying attention. Fearful horses are hyper attention paying. They're like so worried about everything. They're very keenly aware. And then a challenging horse is usually paying attention as well, but they can be quite opportunistic. They're looking maybe for a chance to get in there or have a say or say no. And so they need quiet, firm leadership and very good timing. Otherwise, they will start to take charge of the situation and their people. Usually they're also taking charge of their herd, and that's just that in a quick nutshell.
It takes so much thoughtfulness and observation to and time and experience to come to these conclusions, like to come to the types and then to come to I don't know if it's a secondary type. It's really a type within a type, the passive to aggressive scale, but it's such a gift that you have put the thought in and presented the types for us. I've read a number of articles that you've written, and when I read the types, I was like, of course. But if you had asked me to come up with what those four or any number of types were, it would be very difficult for me. And then to decide that it's important to also differentiate between where this horse falls on the passive to aggressive scale. And in one of the articles, there was a graphic that was provided with it that showed passive on the left and then numbers 1 through 10 all the way to aggressive. And as a visual learner, that helped me understand how you were categorizing these horses with both their type and then where they fall on that scale. And it really helped me understand, what you're looking for when you're deciding what type of horse you're working with. I have a number of questions that came up while you were speaking. One is actually from Arabian Nights. How did that bring you into your work as a dressage trainer? And what has that work as a dressage trainer been?
Well, actually, one of the horses that is in my book, his name is Almara Quebec. He was an Arabian stallion that had been deemed unsuitable for the dinner show, and he was out in the back barn, quarantine barn, waiting to leave when I first started working there. So I was a new guy. I had to be the one to go out and do the back barn, and I instantly fell in love with this Arabian stallion. And I was like, wow, he is really, really cool. I would like to be able to ride him. And I was the busiest person I knew at that time. I had 14 horses at my place, plus a full-time job that was an hour and a half, so 3 hours round trip, getting to Arabian Nights and back every day. And I was a single mom at that time with 3 kids. So
Oh
it was
my
like, you
God.
don't have 5 seconds to rub together, Yvonne. What the heck are you doing? And I'm like, I just really like this horse. And so I talked to the trainer and he said, no, because it's not a good use of company time to work with that horse. He's already going back to the ranch in Arizona. And I said, well, could I work with him on my lunch hour, my 45-minute lunch hour? And he's like, well, it just doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, I'm going to go ask the owner. So I ran up the stairs and knocked on the office door of the owner and said, can I just work with that stallion on my own time? And he said, okay, but why? And I said, I just want to. I just want to. Because he seemed like he was a social force out there. And he was one of the first that I really noticed that a horse can have characteristics. It would be lovely if they're all so simple and they're all just straight social through and through or straight whatever. This horse was a social horse in his heart, but he had had some bad experiences, which as soon as I walked him up to the main barn, he started washing out, just sweating, running down his body. Race horses do that too. I was familiar with that. And I'm like, huh, why are you doing that? And then I only had 45 minutes. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to saddle you up and I'm taking you out to the ring. And I took him out there and it was an indoor auditorium. So it's pretty safe. Like, where's you going to go? So I didn't have time to lunge him or anything. And I went to get on him and he was like standing there like Bambi with his legs all out. And then as soon as I got on him, he was like shaking and sweating. And I'm like, whoa, it's okay. And I went to pet him and he took off. And he's just running around this indoor, and there's a wall and curtains. So he's not going to do anything. But he was like galloping. And I was just sitting on him like, why are you galloping? Why? I didn't ask you to do anything. And you're just running. And I could see he was so scared and ears were like worried and tense. And he ran like pretty much my whole lunchtime away. And I was just like, every time I tried to take the reins, he would throw his head up and be like, never. And he'd keep running faster. And so I was like, finally it's getting close. And I'm like, I got to get off this horse. And Arabians can run for a while. So I kept turning him with the left rein and left rein until he finally was a little bit in a small enough circle that I could pull his head around and fly off of him. And then I was like, okay. And I take him back and hose him off. And everybody's like, ha ha ha, how was Quebec? And I'm like, well, I'll try again tomorrow. Second day, he ran my lunch hour away again. The third day, and he's just running, and I'm just sitting on him, petting him, and like, why are you running? Just kind of like, pay attention. Why are you panicking? And he started putting his left ear on me, and I was like, oh, now you're listening. And so I had tried every day to take the reins, but every time he did, he would speed up and upside down his head and go faster. And when he put his ear on me a couple times, I took that left rein and just like touched it a bit and felt him a bit on it. And he kept his ear. And then it was like he said, "What? What do you want?" And I was like, "Oh, you want to talk to me? This is perfect." And so then I was like, took the rein a little bit and I managed to steer him and then stop him. And then I relaxed. And then I didn't hop off of him. I just went to walk him and took the reins and he put his ear on me again. He said, "What?" I'm like, "I got you." So I had him. That particular stallion, I ran back upstairs. I'm like, "I don't want him to leave. I don't want him to go. I want him to stay here. Can I get him in the dinner show? If he would be in the dinner show, could he stay here? Like, could I take that as a project?" And he said, "Well, the truck for this horse is coming in 10 days. You need to get him in the dinner show within 10 days. And we're not
Oh my
having any tech
God.
rehearsals. We're not having like any practices for you. You just have to get him in the show." It's extremely hard to explain to a horse, "Oh, by the way, there's going to be like all people in these stands and there'll be lights and there'll be spotlights, there'll be really loud music, but we want to do, I want to get you to do something." But from that day, that horse made such progress because he was what I would call a social fearful horse, but the fearful had crowded to the front in anything to do with riding or handling. But he wanted to be a good horse, like in his heart. And so when I started to work with him, I treated him like a social horse. And anytime he was worried, I would just relax and reassure him. And he kept fighting to be him. He wanted to be who he was. And that's the big thing. Whatever the horse's dominant personality is, that's what you want to deal with. But sometimes something else is in the way, baggage, something that came up, whatever. So that horse, anyway, I did manage to get him in the show. I got him in the finale, which was the easiest act, but the most loud, crowded act. But he only had to run in the ring carrying a flag, though. I had to teach him how to carry a flag and park in front of the crowded audience. And then there was two things. The, other, prince and princess couple came in and other people came in. But at the end, we would turn the born free horses loose. We would let 15 to 17 horses loose that weren't stallions. He was a stallion. And that would let them get used to the crowds and get used to the place while they're running and rolling and playing. And the people loved it. And it was the end of the show. And then everybody was on so all of it was great, except for it's extremely hard to explain to a nervous stallion. "Oh, yeah. And by the way, a whole herd of horses is going to run in the ring while you are standing here shaking like Bambi with your person with a flag." And so he did, he managed to get away with it. And they all know this now, but I snuck him in the show the day before. I was going to put him in the show just to see how he was going to be. And I had the Colombian flag and I ran in and I went to my spot that I was at. And he was like being good. He was standing there shaking, but he was holding it together and he was all worried. He was looking around. And then they let the born free horses in and he was like, "I can't do this." And he spun around and he just started running up the rail. Well, other people are standing there with flags. So he was like banging into them. I'm trying to hang on to my flag and I'm trying to control him. And so in the carry on, I dropped my flag, which like instantly the Colombian people that I was in front of all started having a great big fit and pounding on their table and all the rest of it. And somehow the owner of the show, he called me up to the office the next day and he goes, "Did you drop your Colombian flag in front of a Colombian audience yesterday?" "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Something with my flag boot." I just kind of said, "I'm really sorry about that." And I didn't blame it on the horse. And then he said, "Well, I had to give them like free tickets and all this. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. Like whatever I got to do to make up for it." And he said, "Okay." He goes, "When are you going to try that new horse in the show?" "Oh, I'm going to put him in there tonight." And the rest was history with that horse. And people can look me up. I ended up having that horse for 6 years training while I was there. He could do every single act in the show by the time I was done. He could do the Liberty work. He could do the Lipizzan drill, even though he wasn't Lipizzan. I did the square dance, flag drill, Latin act, dancing horses, you name it, he could do it. And I started teaching him dressage. And he was actually the first horse that I trained up to Grand Prix in dressage while I was at the dinner show. It just was so interesting to me and he wanted to learn. And I was his savior. I saved him from his worry, from himself. He couldn't have shown up better for me as a student. And about 5 years after I did it up at Equitana, USA, 1997, I was in the main event. I was the finale. And I took that same horse, rode him with a bridle in Arabic costume with a big full moon in a desert, like behind us on a big screen. And then I took the bridle off and rode him through all of the stuff without a bridle. And then they turned like 15 horses loose in the ring, 9 of them mares. And he worked around those horses, bowed in the middle, and stole the show. And that was like a horse that was one of my favorite horses of my life. but he was also the beginning of my real dressage career. And then it's been a lot of Grand Prix horses since him. But yeah, he was like one of those horses that made me really feel like a horse trainer. That was a
Wow.
long story. Sorry for that.
I thank you for that. For anybody who's just listening and not watching, my jaw is on the floor. I knew that it was going to be such a treat to talk to you, but you are incredible and so brave and so inspiring, and that was such a beautiful story, and what a lucky horse, and what an amazing, like, time and evolution you guys had together. What did you say his name was?
Almara, Quebec. And he actually got approved as a Trakehner breeding stallion, as a Trakehner warm blood because of the scores he got in dressage. I think, the only purebred Arabian stallion that was approved. And I showed him in Florida, against warm bloods, and he held his own and did really, really well. And he just, he learned so much, and you know how to bow and lay down and do liberty work, and I mean everything that you could teach a horse. I would be like, I'm teaching Quebec to do that, and I'm teaching Quebec to do that. And he just kept learning. And he really showed me that when you can get into a horse's mind and get them paying attention to you, anything their body can do will follow. And it was getting into his mind. That's the thing. It wasn't, he was his own unique, very certain self.
Wow. I have a million questions. Did did you learn a lot of your training insights from being with the horses, or did you have a teacher at that time that was like helping kind of develop that muscle for you?
I think I learned mostly, I would say I learned most from books. And the very first horse that I ever got to ride was back behind. I grew up in Toronto, Canada, in the suburbs, so there weren't horses around. But one day, after all my horse riding books that I had read, there were horses down the hill and across the river, the Humber River. And my granny, she had died, but she had always told me, don't, you can't go in that Humber River. Our minister had lost two sons in that river, la, la, la. And I had never gone in that river, but all of a sudden there were horses across the river. And I'm like, I'm going. So, Granny, I'll either see you up in heaven or I'm going to be over there with horses. So I went over there and I saw these like real live horses, because there wasn't much TV, when I was growing up in the 60s. There wasn't a lot of TV. I'm 62. And so I was, I went across, and every horse was something like a book. And there was one horse, he was like I could tell right away, he was friendly and he wanted to meet me. And it was a group of trail riding horses plus a couple of young horses that gotten loose out of their thing and came running up our way. And when I saw them, I didn't know they were there. And I'm like, oh, wow. And I'm so interested in the one, this little blanket Appaloosa, who I named Little Chief right away. He was the best one. I was like, oh, you're the best one. You're the one that I want to ride because you're friendly and you want to meet me. Everybody else, the horses were like, go away, I'm eating grass, like pinning their ears at me and like not interested, because trail horses don't have the best life. And he was a happy guy. So anyway, the next, then this lady, a girl on a ponytail, came riding up bareback, made me so jealous. I'm like, I want to be that ponytail girl. I want to ride, horses. And she said, hey, little dumb kid, get away from the horses. Like, you can't be out here. And she got the horses and brought them all where? And I'm like, well, horses are there. So the next morning, I got up super early, crossed the river again, followed that trail way down there, and found this barn. And I went up there and I said, hey, I know a lot about horses. Could I work for you and could I do things for free? And she goes, well, what can you do? I'm like, I could tack and untack, I could clean stalls, I could do whatever. And she's like, almost gonna like buy it. And then she was like, where did you learn about horses? And I'm like, from books. She's like, go away. You're gonna get hurt and I'm gonna get in trouble, and you just go away. If you have money for a trail ride, you can stay. And then anyway, she said, we just got use. Actually, they got use of that big field that the horses were in. And she said, so you need to leave the horses alone. And if you have money, you can go on a trail ride. I'm like, well, what about that, blanket Appaloosa that was out there? And she said, no, that's a flying horse. You can't ride him at all. He's not even broke yet. And I was like, So then, like, every time I would watch that field, and every time those horses were out there, I would sneak over there, and I had this yarn that I had made a neck rope out of, like the Indians ride with neck ropes. And I went over there and I started like putting the neck rope around and leading him around, and then like brought him over to a rock and climbed on his back and taught him how to steer, and was riding this horse. And I would watch for the ponytail girl, and I would dive off the horse and run back down the river and hide so that she wouldn't catch me. And I was having so much fun that summer. And I actually got that horse so he could walk, trot, and canter with my little silly turquoise neck yarn rope. And And I was thinking, wow, I am a trainer, you know. And one, I was like laying back on his back and he was eating grass. And all of a sudden I heard hoof prints and it was the wrong time. And the ponytail girl and another lady were riding out. And I'm like, oh, crap, here I am. So she saw me and she's like, you're not supposed to be out here. And I was like, I'm sorry. And then she was, why are you riding that horse? I'm like, because I love him. And then the lady that was with her, it was actually her horse. And she said, we're taking him away to start his training right now. And I was like, oh, he's such a good horse. And then she goes, you've been riding him? And I said, yeah, he's great. And she goes, do you want to show me? And I'm like, yeah. And I like showed her how I steered him around and how I did stuff. And I said, I'm going to be a horse trainer when I grow up. And she goes, you might already be a horse trainer. And she let me ride him all the way back to the barn, which the ponytail girl was super mad about. And then she was like really nice to me. And she said, I think maybe you are going to be a horse trainer. So she was the first person that said, maybe you're just some person that needs to be around horses. So that's, I
Wow.
think, what happened. And I just kind of always like felt like I could talk to horses and I could understand them and that I knew what they were thinking. And I don't know, it's kind of worked out for me.
Yeah. That is really cool. You the one thing that you are not good at is taking no for an answer.
No, or being afraid. I was like,
Right.
I never thought I was going to fall off. I never
Yeah.
thought I was going to get hurt. I was always the most surprised person when I hit the ground, and I did fall off a lot, but I never thought I was going to. And by
Yeah.
the time I hit the ground, I'm like, oh, I can't do that again. That was dumb. I need to get back up there. And, I've fallen off a lot, and I've been hurt a number of times now as I go on, through life,
Mhm.
with horses that were more athletic or whatever, caught me by surprise. But I never, it was always a reason and it was mostly my fault. Mostly
Yeah.
every time I fell off, it was my fault.
Wow. Okay, let's talk about when you were speaking about um, the stallion at Arabian Nights. He's a social horse that was also fearful, and it sounds like that came from baggage. So, will you just tell us more about dual personality type horses? And is it that they're born with one and then their experiences bring on another, or it could be they're born with both? Tell us
Born with both.
more so we can
Born with
understand
both.
that.
Born with both. One's more dominant. For example, like a social slash challenging horse. A social horse is not necessarily going to want to argue or take the leader. A social horse could be all right and fine and happy and la di da di da, but then a new horse might get introduced, and then the social horse might be like, yeah, it's all fine, like when I'm comfortable. But if something takes them out of their comfort zone, then you'll see that second side. So that's where Quebec was a social horse when you met him in the stall in his comfort zone, but he'd had baggage. And so that brought out his fearful side. And whatever their dominant personality is, what you meet when they're at ease and when they're being themselves, what I call their factory settings. When the horse is like his regular factory settings, who is that guy? And I tell people, I bring horses in a round pen. When we were at the dinner theater, we would bring them in the round pen and I would like put a little bit of pressure on them, like make them change direction, when they maybe didn't want to, cut them off and cut them off again. And I would watch what they do about that. And I would watch, like, are they really quick to react? Or are they a little bit worried about it? Are they looking at me with a worried face? Or are they looking at me like, stop bossing me around? Or are they kind of like, hey, what are you doing? Can I just play and hang around with you instead? Or are they not paying attention at all? And I have to do something to be like, hey, listen, okay, now do this. That's the aloof guy. And some horses, they might be one way, and then when you start putting pressure on them, they don't act linear. They start acting Jekyll and Hyde-ish. You see that second side of them. And when you see that side, you have to deal with that. You have to, so if they are challenging, you have to say, hey, I'm the boss. Like, you're not doing that. Or, hey, you're worried. I'll reassure you, I can handle it. Don't worry. Don't be worried. But then if they go back to their normal comfort zone, deal with them like that. And then just know that something could trigger them to act a little bit differently. And when they do, you have to treat them as they're acting. They need somebody to deal with them. And a lot of people don't know this, so I'll say it, but there could be 30 horses in a herd. Number one knows he's number one. They all know who's number one. Number 12 knows he's number 12. Number 14 knows he's number 14. Number 23 knows he's number 23. Every single horse knows like who they could be in charge of or who and how low they are on the totem pole. And that's like important to know because a horse that's always low on the totem pole. He doesn't have much security. He doesn't like, he's not going to stand up to much. But a horse is number one and he's been in a big herd and he's number one. For you to be number one, you might have to be exactly what he needs. He needs properly and fairly of somebody who will be the boss of him in the best way possible, that they will respect you and that they'll also be the boss. And so I find that in my life as a trainer, challenging and fearful horses are often the more trickiest ones to train and they require more experience. That little chief horse, he was a little passively social horse. Anybody could have trained him. You know, anybody could have trained him. And that's the thing. Some horses will make you feel like a horse trainer. And he was one of those. He was like the best first horse I could have had. And I could tell on at the glance that he wasn't like the other guys. He was just like, how you doing? I want to hang out with you. And I would go to leave him and he would follow along. And, you know, you can get horses to join up, especially fearful horses. Aloof horses are a little harder to join up and follow you around and follow you around the round pen with that kind of work. But a little social horse is going to be pretty quick to latch onto you.
So let's take it for people listening. I'm sure they're all trying to figure out what their horse is. So let's take it through two steps and tell me if I need to add a step. But like the identifying step and then the adjusting the training approach step. So the identifying step sounds like that happens observing in a round pen. So I would love for you to just give us a little bit more to have in our head as we're looking at our horse to help us say like I'm seeing challenging. I think the coat in the round pen is a great suggestion, but anything that can kind of help someone be more confident that they're identifying correctly, or maybe other things they might just know about their horse outside of the round pen. And then let's talk about how they can get into a trainer's mindset and think about how they approach teaching this horse differently than they might approach teaching a different horse.
Okay, and I will say what really prompted me to start writing about personalities is we were importing a lot of horses from Europe and training them, and a lot of the people would go over to Europe, you know, with a guide and look at horses that were set up for them, ready to buy, dressage horses, and horses are herd animals. And in a good training program, horses will start all acting like their training program. And so you have to look a little harder to find their personality. And I had a number of horses come over from Europe. And, you know, when they lose their rudder, you know, the people look at them and they're tuned up and they've been in a program and they're a certain way. And the people get on and ride. And then they can't, you know, they say yes and they vet it and it gets to them and goes through quarantine and gets to their barn. And then they're instantly like, oh, he wasn't anything like what he was there. And I'm like, did you really know him there? Or did you just ride him there? Did you get to know him over there? And so I tell them when you meet a horse or you're going to buy a horse, because they're reading you and you're reading them. But if you're a stranger to that horse, you're going to get the best read of who he is as an individual. The more the horse knows you, he's already interacting with you in a way that he's used to interacting with you. So as a stranger, I tell people when you go to buy a horse, number one, talk to the groom. Ask the groom. I did an experiment when I was writing the book, and my oldest daughter's first boyfriend, he was a computer nerd, and nobody can hang around with me without having to work. And so I'm like, Blaze, you're going to feed the horses for 1 week, and you're going to feed 40 horses. You're going to walk in there and give them what was on the paper in their scoop. And I said, I want you to watch the horses when you feed them. Watch them. And he goes, watch them for what? I'm like, watch how they act. Watch what they do. And I said, and then after a week, I said, I'm going to walk along with you and I want you to tell me what you think about this horse. And so of that, of all the horses, you know, and I gave him a couple of clues. You know, I said, does that horse seem very welcoming and happy when you go in? Does he seem a little bit reserved and worried when you go in? Is he not paying attention at all? But, oh, you're the food guy, so he's going to go get his food. Or is he a bit territorial about his home, his place? And he's kind of like, hey, what are you doing in here? And you feel like, you know, you're intruding in his stall. And so he kind of had that idea. And by the end, he was right. 38 out of 40 horses, he was right about guessing their personality by feeding them.
Wow.
So you, by doing things with a horse that, you know, by leading them in and out with their friends, by watching them interact with other horses, by, you know, teaching them, trying to teach them something new, taking them away from their friends, That can tell you too, like he's too dependent on his friends, or he's super fearful and he hasn't bonded with you yet, so he's got to get with his buddies. And those are all things that you have to pay attention to. There's so many things where horses could be spoiled, and then people will say, well, he's challenging. No, you have just like let your horse get away with too much. And so horses can be, they could, people that ride too noisy, they're too hands and legs at the same time, or seat holding and stiff body. And so the horse is like, it's too much information and I'm a aloof horse. So I can't figure it out. I'm just going to not react at all. And or I'm going to kick at your leg because, that'll stop you kicking because you're worried and I'm not, and that worked. So you have to pay attention to anything you're bringing to the table, and people don't understand neutral enough. People don't understand how to be still and quiet and relaxed and nothing. To walk up to a horse with the relaxed best version of yourself, or to get on a horse's back with the relaxed best version of yourself. People have too much white noise. They've got stuff in their head, or they've got something somebody told them. And so if you go to meet a horse, whether you're getting on his back to meet how does he feel when you're riding him, or you go in his stall and you want to meet him in his place, people, you have to not bring yourself, like bring yourself quiet, bring yourself not much. But people have so much white noise inside of them. And, when they're riding, they do, when they're interacting with horses, and horses like feel that, they hear it. It's like to some horses, just this energy buzz that drives them insane. And certain horses will react to that more. Challenging horses will be like, get away, you're too noisy, like I'm gonna not respond to you. Or a fearful horse that gets them worried. And a social horse might just intrude in your space and start nudging you around and mauling you and getting in your personal space, and you got to say no. No, this is my bubble, I'm allowed in your space, you're not allowed in mine. And that, I think, is hard for people. I think the hardest thing when I'm teaching and doing clinics is people get on and they're not really looking at the horse that they have in front of them. They're listening to what somebody said about it, or what they saw on a video about it, or somebody said years ago he did something wrong. They're always looking for that wrong thing that he did, not knowing why he did it. Who is he today, right now? And that, I think, being able to read a horse, that's mandatory. That you can be still and quiet and observe and relaxed, and not having the horse having to respond to you until you want them to respond to you. And a lot of people can't just be. That's something that I've noticed. And it is hard for people, and it's worth practicing. It's really worth practicing being quiet. And I'm not
And
quiet
by
right now.
I mean, I don't want you to be quiet. I'm loving everything that you're saying. Do you bring that mantra of just be to every ride so that you can assess the horse that you're working with today?
Every ride. I never ride yesterday's horse. I get on every single horse every day. I walk up to every horse every day, quiet and still. And how are you? And I observe. I'll walk up to a horse, and I notice as I go up to the stall, like he's, I look, he ate all his food, he's got his water, he's got poop. I notice all the health things. But then I notice, like, is he interested as soon as I come? Do I have to get his attention? Is he standing in the back corner? Is he willing to come? When I walk up and I get myself close to him, does he retract? Does he shrink into himself? Or is there nothing? Is there no response? Or does he feel like he may want to, like, test me or be a little bit of a bully? Or is he like instantly interested where you got a treat, mauling me, mugging me, and that sort of thing. And I just kind of I want to know that. And then I want to say, if I go to put a halter on you, I'm putting a halter on you. You don't get to do other stuff, but I'll notice what they do. And I notice that little bit of an ear pin. I notice a little bit of the eye just side eyeing me, like, don't do that. And I'm not going to do anything. A horse's facial expression, a lot of people too. I've handled a lot of stallions. I've ridden a lot of stallions. I've trained a lot of stallions up to Grand Prix. And people think, a stallion has a certain personality. They could have any personality, and gelding a stallion will only turn the volume down on the exact personality he has. So a stallion might be, if he was a number 8 social horse and you gelded him, he'd be a 5 or 6 social horse. He's not going to not be a social horse. If you had a challenging stallion that was an 8 or a 10 out of, he's going to go, yes, geld him probably, because you don't need that. Although challenging horses make great race horses. They're the ones that'll look in the eye and go on and win. Challenging horse is the one that's going to be brave over the fences in cross country, and he's going to go in there. But he needs a rider that will let him do his job. And when you're micromanaging a challenging horse and you're not fair about it, they're going to get mad at you, and you're going to have a problem. And so you have to be the rider that that horse needs. You have to be the handler that that horse needs, which means you have to figure that horse out, in my opinion, of course.
Right. Will you walk us through a scenario, whether you want to use the example of like a challenging stallion or the social horse that's mauling you for treats, but take us through that horse and then you as a handler and rider, just so that we can start teasing these thoughts out for other people. And to be honest, I feel like you're helping me totally grasp these personality types and how to determine which horse is which. Like I could maybe do what your daughter's first boyfriend did, but I am not sure that once I sat on the horse, I could say I can be a good trainer for you because I'm observing these things. And I'm sure that it just takes some being in the saddle and just being, like you said, and observing, but walk us through so that you can maybe help me have a head start on that.
Okay, let's say we had a very fearful horse that was super worried about everything. Okay, and you go to take him out, and he's feels like super worried. He doesn't want to go, and he's worried about his environment, but then he's also going to be a little bit worried about you. So the first thing you have to be is so relaxed and be able to reassure him and wait or hang with him or put your hand on his neck or just, sit there and breathe slow and relax with him until he, like, you can tell they just let the breath out a little bit. And when he lets his breath out, he's a little bit letting his guard down. And at that moment, then you can say, well, all right, buddy, I want to take you somewhere. And you take him somewhere and he walks towards something and he's like, oh my gosh. Just instantly then, whether I'm on their back or I'm leading them, I will let all my energy out to say, when you inhale and worry, I exhale because I'm fine. I got it. I'm your huckleberry. I'm your leader and I'm fine. And when a horse is like, oh my gosh, what's that? I'm like, before I even see what it is they're carrying on about, I'm like, doesn't matter because I got it. I got it. I got you. Fearful horses are tired of being fearful. They want somebody to save them from themselves. They want that. And I'll give a real quick story. I judged the Road to the Horse, the World Champion Colt starting contest a couple of times. Right?
Wow.
And the first time I judged it, I didn't know Vicky Wilson, and she was in it. She was a wild card from New Zealand, and she took a $500 horse and took it to the World Cup in jumping. And she's a definite, really good horsewoman. We got along like house of fire, and it was one of those things when you meet a really, really good horsewoman, and I'm supposed to be judging, and there's four competitors, and I mostly wanted to watch her. But you have like 2 minutes to pick your horse out of this big group, and they're all running around in the Alltech Arena at the Kentucky Horse Park. And I would have picked the horse she picked. He was in the middle of the pack, head down, low man on the totem pole, looking for somebody to lead him. And he had a friend out there he was following around, and he's like, okay, if you're okay, I don't care about none of this because I got you. He was okay with that. Well, then they take the horses out and they put the four into the 4 round pens. And all the horses now have lost their herd. They're isolated in their own pen they can't get out of. Some of the horses you could see, there was this big, happy, social dope. He was already playing with the tarp and this thing. And I'm like, oh, you're a good one. I'd love to have you in this competition. Vicky Wilson's horse was panicked. He was like freaking out. He was so worried. And he was like, oh, no, oh, no. And the judges came out first, and then the competitors come out. And I was watching the competitors, and I was watching them look at their horses. And Vicky, like, she saw her horse, and she's like, oh, you're like that. And as she was walking by me, she was like this. From outside the round pen, she let her breath out, and then she was just like totally neutral. And I was like, who the heck are you? And I was like, wow. And then I was like, oh yeah, the other competitors, watch all of them guys. Yeah, but who are you? And I just watched her, and she was impeccable. By the third day of that competition, and people can look up what the Road to the Horse is. It is a world champion colt starting contest because you have to be that good for what they want you to do on that third day. You have to know your horse and get it on your side and get it to your point. And she had that horse by the end. He went through the whole obstacle course way before the time was, and a lot of people run out of time. Then she took the saddle off, hopped back on him bareback, and then jumped him over one barrel on the ground, just like a cow, because she talked him into it because he was her friend by then. and she just totally got that horse on her side. And by day three, you wouldn't say, "Oh my gosh, there's a fearful horse," because she transferred his dependency on his friends in the herd to her. And then we're doing this. Okay, okay. And that's the thing, that being a good trainer equalizes out the personalities if you can be what the horse needs. So, sorry, I go off on tangents, don't I? Sorry about that.
No, I need this tangent to be longer because I'm writing everything you say as a quote. um, that is fascinating, and Road to the Horse is fascinating, and I feel
And
like
she won the
lots
hell out of that year.
she
She
did.
won the hell
I
out
was
of that.
curious.
Oh yeah, all judges unanimously had her first. Not just me.
That's really
I
cool.
was a fan, but all the judges were fans.
That's really cool. I that competition feels like a special opportunity to kind of observe what you're talking about in terms of people recognizing what the horse needs, because I don't know how you go from point A to B in 3 days um without catering to the horse that's in front of you and the horse that you chose and being a partner.
Exactly. And all good horse trainers, they know horse personalities. They don't have to use my book or my words or my anything. They just know it. They just know they're dealing with individuals. And once you know their personality and you realize how much energy they're going to put into either behaving or misbehaving and how intelligent they are, the way that I gauge intelligence of a horse is how many repetitions does it take for the horse to kind of grab onto a concept and be able to repeat it, an interaction, a concept, whatever. And then I can say, all right, you're pretty clever. And, horses are like people. Some are smart, some are not. Some don't need to be as smart as they are, but a smart, high energy, high up the scale of his personality, that's a horse that needs a proper rider, needs the right
Mhm.
person for him. And that's, this lady, she kept bringing over these horses from Europe, and they were Swedish horses, which Swedish horses back then for sure had a tendency to be more challenging. And but she knew somebody in Sweden, had a contact, and the horse behaved over there because it was in a proper training program. By the time it got there, it was the wrong horse for her. She was very meek and mild. She wasn't the person to be able to be authoritative, and the horses knew it, and they were opportunistic, and so they were eating her for lunch. And I was like, you need to let me help you pick out your next horse, because she sold the first horse. I sold it for her to the proper person. And then she went and got another horse just like him. I'm like, this is the same horse. He's just wearing different color. And I'm like, why did you get the same horse? I'm like, what is your marriage like? Like, why do you have the same horse?
Right.
And she was like, I said, why do you have another challenging Swedish monster? And she's like, oh, he was really good over there. And I'm like, you didn't ask him any questions over there, did you? She goes, no, because he was so good. I just felt like happy and nice. And I'm like, yeah, but he's not the guy for you. I said, go ask his groom. I said, he's probably going to say he's a jerk when you go to feed him, or he's a jerk when you push him over, or you do something, or you take something from him. I said, you don't need that horse. You need a passively social horse. That's what you need. And some people will stay so long in what I call a bad marriage with a horse, and they're not a horse trainer. I'm like, what are you doing? That you're not the person for this horse. You're not. And I even called Bo Jenna, who is the director of Flinga in Sweden. He runs a state school over there. And I'm like, okay, Bo, like, it was Swedish horses. I've been getting a little Easter parade of them in my barn because the American women can't ride them. And like, what is up with the Swedish horses? And I said, they seem like they're quite challenging and a little bit tricky to get through to, and you have to be a bit strong. And I said, so what about the Swedish women over there? Who's riding the horse? He goes, well, they're like you, Yvonne. They're strong and they're tough, and they say yes, you will, and you will do it. And I'm like, okay, that's the problem. American women want a pet. They want a horse that can be their friend. And I said, and these Swedish horses, I said, they don't they're not for these American women. I said, you have to breed temperament a little bit more and find horses, because people will say, I don't like Swedish horses. They're not saying that. They're saying they don't like challenging horses, because a
Mhm.
lot of Swedish horses were challenging back then when I had my Easter parade of them. And I think people should pay attention, because there are tendencies in breeds of certain past personalities that do kind of run rampant in a personality. Like a lot of quarter horses, a lot are more aloof. Definitely a
Oh.
lot of Lipizans are more aloof. We had a lot of Lipizans in the dinner show, and they were very aloof horses as a rule. There were the exceptions. There's always the exception to the rule, but as a rule, they were more aloof horses. And sometimes aloof horses tend to underreact to stimulation or to whatever. and then overreact because they weren't paying attention. And they weren't paying attention to whatever. And so then they kind of got in trouble, but they weren't paying attention to the conversation that got them in trouble. And all of a sudden you have to get louder or sharper or quicker. And then they're like, what the heck? And then they'll overreact. But that's actually normal for an aloof horse to underreact and then overreact. Also, aloof horses will sometimes spook at something that changed or something they didn't notice the first few times. A fearful horse is going to notice everything and spook right off the bat. An aloof horse might walk around the ring a couple times and be going along and in their little snow channel coma, and then all of a sudden they're like wake up a bit and they're like, what the hell is that? And it's like a random aloof horse spooking. And people will be like, why does he do that? And I'm like, because he wasn't paying attention the first 3 times he passed it, so he didn't notice it. But all of a sudden he did notice it, and they're like, what the heck's that? That wasn't there last time. I was paying attention. And so that people need to be ready for when they have those aloof horses as well, because it's more of a random spook. And I would say with an aloof horse, the biggest job is to get the aloof horse to say what, to pay attention. So when I'm riding an aloof horse, I don't assume they're paying attention. I assume they're not. And a lot of times when you're riding a aloof horse, you have to relax and let them actually veg out for a few seconds, because it's like a little kid that hasn't had to learn much, and then you put them in a class of a different language, and then they're trying to keep up, and all of a sudden they just put their head on their desk and they're like, I can't learn anymore today. And so you have to pay attention with an aloof horse that his life, he hasn't been paying attention for half of his life. He wasn't paying attention to what was going on in the field with his mother. He wasn't paying attention. So we have to teach them to start paying attention and then do something after they pay attention. So it's kind of, you got to say, hey, buddy, you might touch them with your foot at the girth, or you might, vibrate the rein a little bit. And then they put an ear and they're like, what? And I'm like, okay, this. But I wouldn't just ask him something when he's in his snow channel, because he's not going to answer me. And I'm going to have to use too light of aids or too strong aids because he didn't say what, So I'm always looking for those windows of paying attention so I can get through the horse, whether he's on the ground in the round pen. A horse might just be sitting there like a blob in the middle of the round pen, and you're like, do something. And, he may like wait and then just move off. But you see, he's like moving his feet, but he didn't engage. He didn't look at you. He didn't pay attention to you. So I might just make some noise or be out there and be like, hey, and then when he looks at me, I'll be like, now I'm going to be quiet and let you veg out again. But if I move, you need to look at me. If I say something, if I talk, you need to listen. And I start then. And it's still harder for aloof horses. So I've had some aloof horses that got up to Prix St. George and I won. And that's as far, they were physically talented, could easily do the work physically, but mentally, the conversation of a Grand Prix, forget about it. Can't do it. And it would be, I was like, it's not, he can't. He can't. Like he can't. And so I would say, like, sell him as a small tour horse where he can do it. That's the edge of his mental game. It doesn't matter if he's not going to be able to string those sentences together. He's just not going to be able to do it. And so you find something that he can do that's within his comfort zone, his natural, normal factory settings. So you can train him, but you can't change him totally into something else.
Yeah. Tell us what advice you give to your students about finding the horse that matches them. And it sounds like that was all I kind of was thinking about initially with this question, but it sounds like there's an element of matching the rider and the discipline.
Yes, all of that. And I paid so much attention to horses, and I figured out horses, and they were easy for me. And then I realized, but all the horses have people around them. How am I going to get to the horses unless I get to the people? And I don't know people, and I didn't really care about people, and I didn't pay attention to people. And so I'm like, So I started studying the Myers-Briggs test, which is the most well-known personality indicator in the world. And, that became a little easier for me to all my students still, and my working students, my riding students will take the Myers-Briggs test. And when I know what their letters are, and they read that, their ratio for what they are, and they read it and they say, yeah, I'm pretty much an ISFJ or an ENTJ or an ESTJ or whatever they are, that will tell me, like one of this lady, she came from a couple states over to take a lesson from me. And, she was an adult amateur, and she, like her, I could maybe help her get a bronze medal. She comes in, and I said, well, I would really appreciate it because I don't know you and you're shipping in, and, you're not going to, you'll only come once a month. I said, it would help me, like, to get to know you if you would just take this test. And she's like, that's a little bit invasive, don't you think? Like, I have to take a personality test to ride? And I'm like, no, you don't have to. I said, it just will help me because I don't have enough time to get to know you the old fashioned way, and I'm not really good at it. So if you could just let me know what you are, I know what that is. And so she humored me. She came back the next morning. She said, okay, I'm an ISFJ. She goes, so how is that going to help you help teach me? And I said, well, I will tell you that you like to do things by the book and you have a rather shallow comfort zone. You do not want to be a hero and you want to be told what to do in order sequentially. And I said, so that's going to help me to teach you that way. And I'm not going to go from the back page forward backwards and tell you what the Grand Prix looks like and then how you're going to ride it. I'm going to take a look at you and I'm going to tell you the skill sets that you're lacking that you need that will get you to your point step by step. And I'm going to give you homework. She goes, well, that's like perfect. That's exactly what I want. I'm like, see, it was good to take that personality test. So all my working students, my apprentice trainers, people come here to learn to be trainers, and they all take the personality test so I can know them. And it really takes people taking a good look at themselves and saying, what is in my natural comfort zone? If you're a trainer, you got to train all of them. You got to figure it out. That's your job. And I tell the kids too, you can't just train the ones that are the ones that appeal to you or you like or are easy for you. Then don't call yourself a trainer. If you can't like assess problems and figure out a horse, you're not going to be the kind of trainer that you want to be. You're not. And then you're an adult amateur, that tries to make money. But if you're going to train horses for a living, you have to be able to assess them. You have to be able to tell what's real from the horse, what's baggage, what have they picked up along the way, and how do you get to the knot in the yarn. You got to get to the knot in the yarn and start from there and then bring them to where you want them to be. But you got to know who they are and you got to know who you are. That's important.
It's such a gift that your students have, that you see them as individuals who learn in a unique way, and you're wanting to cater to them. And that's something that we've heard so much from our members. I mean, a lot of people have had bad experiences with trainers, and I don't think anyone sets out to be a trainer that's going to give a rider a bad experience, but I think it happens a lot. And I think your approach is just such a gift to people. And I feel just entirely not worthy of being able to spend the last hour with you, because you are one in a million is not enough. Just your everything. It's so special, and I truly feel so energized getting to speak with you. My last question for you is an impossible one for you, I imagine. What books do you recommend, horse books, to people listening? And whenever anybody mentions a book on this podcast or any of the podcasts that we put out, we get inundated with messages like, what book did she mention? Can you link to the book? People love these book recommendations. So I'm sure that you have a lot of books that you would recommend in the topic of horses, and your books, of course, are where people should go first after they've read your books. What do you
Well,
recommend?
ride the right horse is about personalities, and really, you don't need to read the whole thing. There's a lot of case studies in there, and I think once you get the general idea of it, I don't know that you have to read the whole book. And the second book I wrote, I very presumptuously wrote a book from the horse's point of view about how we would like to be trained from training level to Grand Prix, each chapter by different horses. So that also would take like somebody to be like, yeah, that's interesting to me. So I
That
would
is that
say
one from birth to backing, or is
no, it's called the Dressage Horse Manifesto, and that's by Trafalgar Square put that out.
oh
And
amazing.
yeah, and that's yeah, it's kind of written like I talk, but it's written from the horse's point of view, like what horse pet peeves, and there is a bit about equine personalities in there as well. And then it talks about like problems that come up at the levels and how to deal with it. But I try to have different horses writing the different chapters, again, quite presumptuously, because there you go. But I knew all the horses and I wrote all the horses
Great.
that were in it and I knew them well. So I kind of said, well, like this is how they were to train. And so it's interesting in that way, and it's not that complex. Some books are kind of heavy and a little bit harder to read, but I can't. I mean, I've read all the books. I've read so many books that I can't like put one ahead of the other because I liked Podolsky's books. I like Reiner Klimke's book, on the making of Alec, the dressage world champion. I've I liked all the horse books, every single thing by Walter Farley, C.W. Anderson, everything. I don't think any horse book is bad if you like reading it, you want to get to the end of it. And I don't know exactly where all my knowledge came from. It was a lot of books, it certainly was, and it
Mhm.
was a lot of hanging around horses.
Well, it's such a treat to be able to speak to you, and, um, thank you, thank you, thank you for taking the time to share your insight and wisdom with us tonight. I know that people are gonna just eat this up and be so pleased to get to learn from you, so thank you for taking the time, and thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it because I think I just babbled on, and if anybody got any sense out of that, super good. I'm sorry if it was just mindless, but that's the way my brain works. So I'm just hanging around with horses.
Yes, well, it works in a fascinating way, and I guarantee you nobody could listen to this. They would have to be number 10 aloof human to, um, not gain a lot from this conversation. So we greatly appreciate it, and I hope that we can speak with you more in the future, and everyone else, have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, guys.
Thank you.